Greetings on the occasion of Vinayaka Chaturthi. Today it is a pan-Indian festival, and it is always a matter of great interest to know as to when it became a Tamil festival as well. That's because when we look at ancient Tamil history, we don't find any mention of such a festival or indeed the worship of Lord Ganesha himself. The Sangam era poetry, for instance, is completely silent on any references to Lord Ganesha. In the ancient Tamil epics of Silappatikaram and Manimekalai, we come across elephant worship during the festival of Indravizha, but there again we don't come across any worship of Lord Ganesha, the elephant-headed god. When does that really begin? In the 4th century, we find the large bas-relief of Karpaga Vinayakar at Pillayarpatti was carved. Interestingly, this is one of the few places where we know the name of the sculptor himself. He has carved it just below the deity, and he calls himself Ekattur Kun Perumparanan. And next to that is also inscribed the name Desi Vinayakar. So we know that sometime in the 4th century, the worship of Ganesha appears to have gained ground. We also find that the Ganesha there is very different. Two-armed, with a trunk that is turning towards the right and not to the left, as is very common in most temples of South India. In one hand, Ganesha is holding what appears to be some sweet, and the other he is holding a Shivalinga. It's an enormous bas-relief of almost 6 feet. But it dates to the 4th century. After that, we find that in 642 AD, when the Pallavas waged war against the Chalukyas, their commander-in-chief Paranjyoti, whom later becomes Siritonda Nayanar, he went up to Badami, which was the capital of the Chalukyas and also known as Vatapi in those days, and he brought back an idol from there, which he installed in his village of Tiruchengattangudi. That idol even today is known as Vatapi Ganapati. It is very interesting that in Tamil tradition, it is often believed that you need to bring away a Ganesha idol and not get a new one if you want to start worship of Ganesha. Perhaps Paranjyoti and the idol that he brought began that legend. But yes, there is an idol called Vatapi Ganapati located in Tiruchengattangudi. But the Pallavas and thereafter, in the time of the Cholas, the worship of Ganesha appears to have gained ground. And we find that the Cholas in certain temples installed Ganeshas. For instance, in the big temple in Tanjavur, you have a tiny idol of Ganesha in the southwestern corner, now almost hidden by the sanctum for Lord Ganesha that was built by the Marathas in the 19th century. The worship of Ganesha during the time of Cholas is almost certainly because of Nambiyandar Nambi, who was hugely venerated by the Emperor Rajaraja. It was Nambiyandar Nambi who codified the Thevaram and gave us the lyrics as we know of them today, and it was he who identified the works of Samandar, Appar and Sundaramurti, all of which today we together collectively know as the Thevaram. So he was a great devotee of Lord Ganesha, and he has written what is known as Vinayakar Irattai Manimalai. That is not a very popular hymn in Tamil. What is very, very commonly recited is the Vinayaka Ragaval attributed to Avvayar. Those who have seen Gemini's film Avvayar will think that there was just one woman of that name, but that is really not true. There were many Avvais in Tamil history. A woman scholar was given that title. And one of these very many Avvais, sometime in the 10th or the 11th century, appears to have composed this Vinayaka Ragaval. When you read it, you find that the iconography of Ganesha, as we know of it today, had more or less crystallized by her time. She describes a Ganesha with a huge stomach, the trunk, large ears, and then she describes him having 8 arms, not 4 as we conventionally believe. The Pallavas, as I said, had begun the tradition of carving Ganeshas in various places, and one among these is the magnificent lower cave in the rock fort in Tiruchirappalli. Most worshippers miss this cave. They are very keen to go up to the Tayumanava Swami shrine and then go to the Pullayar shrine, which is right at the top. There are in fact two caves. One is the upper cave and the other is the lower cave. The upper cave is a beautiful temple cave shrine built by Mahendra Pallava to Lord Shiva, and that is known as Lalitankura Pallaveshwaram. And that is locked most of the time. But the lower cave is kept open, and it is certainly worth a visit. When you go there, you find that there is a beautiful carving of a standing Ganesha, four-armed, huge stomach, in one of the corners of that particular cave shrine. It is certainly worthy of a visit. The Cholas themselves did not believe in putting up huge images of Lord Ganesha. That was more a Pandyan and a Nayak tradition. In fact, in the temples that the Pandyan kings and the Nayaks made very famous, you have large icons known as Mukkuruni Pullayar. The Mukkuruni is actually a huge measure of rice flour, and it was normally the practice to make one huge modaka or korukkattai and offer it to that Ganesha. So the korukkattai had to be of the same size as the Ganesha himself, or the idol of the Ganesha himself. You find one of the most beautiful Mukkuruni Pullayar icons in the Madurai Meenakshi Amman temple. Later, we find that the Vijayanagar rulers also put up large icons for Lord Ganesha. What about Chennai city? In Chennai, we have some very old temples which have sanctums for Ganesha, like Mylapore, Thiruvanmiyur, Thiruvattriyur. But let's not forget that these were all outside of what we recognize as the colonial city of Madras, to which the British came in 1639. Is there any reference to a Vinayaka temple in British records? Yes, there is. They keep referring to a Chindari Pillari temple. Chinta Ari in Sanskrit means that which destroys worries, and Ganesha is supposed to be that deity. On the other hand, this particular Ganesha seems to have given the British a lot of worry. In those days in Madras city, there was a vertical split in society between what were known as the right-hand castes and the left-hand castes. And there was frequent rioting between these two communities. One of the principal reasons for this was as to who had the right to worship in the Chintari Pillari temple. And sometime in the 18th century, we hear of a particularly bad occasion of rioting when the British government had to impose law and order and people fled the city. There was in fact a bandh, and all the traditional artisans of Madras city fled to the neighboring town of San Thome. Today San Thome is part of Chennai, but in those days it was 3 kilometers away from Fort St. George, and that was quite a distance, so people actually went away. The British government had to invite them back, and finally it established peace, and it also ruled that in future, if there was any rioting over Chintari Pillari, the idol would be taken away from the temple and placed in what was known as the Great Temple Pagoda. What is that great temple of the town pagoda? What was that town pagoda? That was the Chenna Keshava Perumal temple, built in 1640 and which stood where the High Court is presently. So the British threatened that the Chintari Pillari would be uprooted and placed inside the Chenna Keshava Perumal temple. This was sometime in 1718 or so. What is ironic is that 60 years later, Chenna Keshava Perumal moved to where Chindari Pillari was. That temple where the High Court stands today had to be demolished for security reasons, and the British gave an alternate piece of land for rebuilding the Chenna Keshava Perumal temple at the intersection of the NSC Bose Road and Devaraji Mudali Street. This time the people of Chennai funded the construction and they built two temples, Chenna Keshava and Chenna Mallishwara temples, which stand as twins. And just on the opposite side you have a tiny little temple to Lord Ganesha, and this was the Chindari Pillari temple. When you look at it today, you'd be amazed. Was this the temple that created all those problems so many years ago? Then we realized that Ganesha did not create any of those problems. It was the public that went and rioted. He was not really to blame over that, and he remains where he is, maintaining the peace. Let's pray to him, and let us hope that all the troubles that we are facing today, particularly the COVID virus, will soon go away and we will have happiness on this occasion of Pillaya Chaturthi. Thank you very much. If you like stories of this kind, join me on my channel, like, share and subscribe it. Thank you.